Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. So Jennifer, how did you get into broadcasting? Tell us about your career path.
My career path. Nancy, I could use your entire 40 minutes telling this, but I will start at the beginning. I was a college freshman, and I saw a notice for the college radio station, and I walked in, and I got hired. I'm using the word hired loosely because, of course, I wasn't paid, but I got hired as a DJ, the second week of my freshman year of college, and I did that throughout my 4 years. But here's kind of a funny twist. I went to college in Virginia, and the person who was the program director at my radio station who hired me was Herb Ivey, who is now, the captain on WBLM. So what kind of coincidence would that be that these two kids at a college radio station together in Virginia would years later both be making their careers in Portland, Maine? Isn't that funny?
Veteran broadcasters.
Yeah. So I did that for 4 years. I had an internship when I was in college at CNN. I grew up in Atlanta, and I had an internship at CNN, but it wasn't anything like CNN is now. This is going to date me. CNN at the time was this experiment, right? A 24-hour news channel that Ted Turner had the idea for, and it was in the basement of WTBS, which was a UHF station, and it was really, everybody was crowded in. Everybody had a bad attitude. And I had an internship for a noontime show. I think it was called Take Two. And one of the things they did is viewers would write in questions on letters, right? And it was my job to research the answer. And then the anchors would read the answer on air. And I couldn't believe that they were just reading what I wrote on the air. So that was my internship. After college, I thought, I'd always wanted to live in San Francisco, so I just moved to San Francisco, and I thought, well, I'm going to get hired. I have a college degree. I have an internship at CNN. I've been a college radio DJ. I wanted to work in television. I took television production classes in college, and I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get a job for like a year. I did informational interview after informational interview where I just call people up and say, hi, I'm new to San Francisco. Would you meet with me? And finally, I ended up getting a job at KPIX in San Francisco as a news messenger, which I suspect is a job that doesn't exist anymore. It meant that the news messenger team, there were, I think, 3 or 4 of us, had these beat up old news cars, and we just did whatever the station needed. And a lot of it was driving to the airport to pick up tapes that were flying in from Los Angeles or Seattle. Another big part of it was, these tapes, we're thinking these big 3/4-inch tapes. There was only so much storage at the station. So once they were a certain amount old, they went to a storage unit in South San Francisco. So I might have to drive down to the storage unit to get the tapes. But one of the things that was great about that job, which at the time, Nancy, I was making $4 an hour.
Oh.
I was thinking, it was 20 hours a week. I, of course, thought that I was way too good for this job, but it was a foot in the door. One of the things that was so great is that I had an opportunity to rub shoulders with and become friends with some of the best reporters and photographers and producers in the country right then. I had lucked into this fantastic TV station. KPIX was just really visionary. The news director we had at the time was visionary. After I left, he ended up being the first TV station in the country to have a web page. I mean, that's, the kind of, they did amazing things. They covered, there was a paraplegic climber climbing Yosemite, and they were doing live shots from the top of Yosemite, from the bottom, and one of the photographers was climbing with them. They were really ambitious, and now that I look back, I know more than I knew then, I realize how ambitious it was. But one of the things that happens if you've ever been on a television assignment desk is that, I should back up and say news messengers always had to sit at the assignment desk when they weren't doing something. On an assignment desk is that you listen to these police and fire scanners, and, you hear about a fire, for example. There's a fire in Antioch, and you send a photographer out to see if it's a big deal. The photographer would get there and radio in, "This is nothing, I'm coming back." Or he would radio in, I say he or she, we had female photographers too, "This is really a big deal. We need a reporter out there." Well, who would take the reporter out to join the photographer? The news messenger. So almost very regularly, I was in the car with the reporter, getting to talk to them the whole way out, having them talk to me about how they're going to cover the story, what they're thinking about at the time. And then I would be on scene, and I just absorbed it. I just absorbed seeing how the reporter and photographer work together, how the reporters from the different stations work together, how they talked to authorities, how they talked to regular people, how they approached them. And I didn't realize it until I had my first reporting job, but I learned so much just being there. And so I ended up going to graduate school at UC Berkeley because I had lived in California for a couple years by the time I'd heard about their journalism program and applied. So I was in-state, and I got in-state tuition, which was almost nothing. It was amazing. And then after journalism school, I was still working at KPIX. I didn't want to give that up. I'd moved up to weekend assignment editor at that point. And one of my jobs as weekend assignment editor was to call the freelancers if we needed one. And one day I called one of the freelancers, Gary Lindsay, and I said, "Hey, freelance writer, can you come in?" And he said, "Oh, I've been meaning to call KPIX. I just took a job as news director at KMST in Monterey." And I said, "Gary, I'm graduating from grad school in 3 months. Will you remember my name?" And sure enough, he did. And I ended up working at KMST in Monterey. Nancy, it was a terrible station with great people. It was a station this was 1991, and we still worked on typewriters. We did not have a computer in the newsroom. I typed my scripts on 5-copy. The cameras were always breaking. I mean, it was this amazing group of young people who were all trying their hardest, amazing stories to cover. Fort Ord, was going through the first round of base closings. That was in our market. This is kind of funny. We covered Salinas, which is what they call the salad bowl of the world, that area. A company there, Fresh Express, created something that they thought was going to be revolutionary, which was a way to pack lettuce in cellophane so that it would last longer. There was a lot of stuff I remember covering, they called them at the time, I'm sure they would never say this phrase now, the Chinese boat people. Do you remember people coming across the Pacific from China? I covered a story where people were brought to Moss Landing, which is this tiny little harbor in California. The Pebble Beach, the big golf tournament was at Pebble Beach, and all the celebrities. So Leon Panetta was our congressman, and I regularly interviewed Leon Panetta. So for 2 years, it was a really great place to cut my teeth. My parents by then were living in Maine, living in Camden, and which had always been their dream. And I was home. Every time I came to Maine, I would just introduce myself to news directors, reintroduce myself to news directors, drop off tapes. And the Christmas of 1993, I got in to see Larry Price, who was the news director at WCSH. And Larry said, it was a rotten day, Nancy. It was one of those days where it was sleeting and snowing and raining all at once. And I'd brought my little white suit to meet the news director, and I'm like slushing up High Street with like heels on in my little white suit. Anyway, I met with Larry Price, and he closed the door and he said, "You have really good timing. One of our reporters, Jane Skinner, gave her notice this morning, and I'll tell you something I haven't told the newsroom yet. I'm leaving too." And he said, "I really want to leave the newsroom fully staffed because I've loved it so much here, and I don't want to leave the newsroom down a person when they're doing a news director search. And so he introduced me to Lou Colby, and I was hired that day, which is just unbelievable, right? And so I started in my future husband and I drove cross country, and that was January of 1994. We joke because the day we left Monterey, it was 77 degrees, and the day we arrived in Maine, it was 7. We said we lost a digit. The high was 7. But my husband, here's another coincidence. That's my husband, who I met in graduate school. Guess where he grew up? Portland, Maine.
Wow, that's amazing.
So my husband's from Maine. My parents had moved to Maine.
And Maine was just calling you.
It was just
Maine
fate.
calling.
It was just, that's funny. That's a good one. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's on the level of a Keith Shortall groaner. That's good, Nancy. So anyway, I worked at KPIX, as you know, for 13 and a half years, weekend anchor and reporter eventually. And one day I saw a job opening at Maine Public, which was intriguing to me. And I called Keith Shortall and I said, "What's this job?" And he's like, "Oh, Jen, it's the Maine Watch job." And, they really want to put a little more energy into it. At the time, Maine Watch the TV show Maine Watch had been a little bit neglected. Basically, the reporters for the radio newsroom were rotating through who was going to. Every week somebody would take a turn of hosting Maine Watch, but it didn't have its own producer. It didn't have its own host. And Jim Dow wanted to, really sort of put some more energy into it. And I did that. I believe it was 6 years. I don't have the best memory for time. And then all the rotten stuff that happened, when the last recession happened, and Maine Public made the decision to really cut its television production, and they moved me to radio. At first I was doing Maine Calling a couple days a week, and now we're 5 days a week.
Well, that's
so there's the summary. Did I take your whole show?
I love that story. It's so awesome.
Yeah.
And there are so many parallels, because I don't know if you even know this, but I was a production assistant at WCBB TV, public television in Lewiston, working with Angus King.
On Maine Watch.
Oh, my gosh. In the early 80s.
Oh, my goodness.
And then we started to do a TV show on how to ski at Sugarloaf, and I moved to Sugarloaf to help with that, and then ended up staying at Sugarloaf.
Public television did a show on how to ski?
Yeah, it was a 13-part series.
Oh, how fun.
On how to ski, and I think it was 1984, 85, that winter.
Oh my God. Now that you say that, Nancy, I think I've heard stories about that. Was there a night where somebody cut a cable by mistake or something like that? Yes. Yeah. Some of the folks who've been around at Maine Public have some stories. Now it's all kind of coming back to me. Yeah.
There was a whole crew of us that stayed at Sugarloaf for 6 weeks, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven because I was getting paid, again, probably $6 an hour or something crazy, but I was getting paid to live at Sugarloaf for 6 weeks, and I was a skier.
What a great idea, too.
And when you talk about those 3/4 inch tapes, a lot of the time, if there was big ski races at Sugarloaf, we would tape them, and then I would have to get in my car and drive to Bangor and Portland, and deliver them to the stations, but also put tapes on airplanes to go off to the Weather Channel or where in Atlanta.
Right. The kids today, they have no idea. They have no idea of the logistics that we dealt with for every single piece of tape that was on. When I was in San Francisco, when I was trying to get my first job, I took some classes at something that was called Western Public Radio with this man named Leo Lee, and I've learned since that Leo Lee is a legend. There's a big award named for him in the public radio world, but Leo Lee had been the first West Coast bureau chief for National Public Radio, and then when he retired, he started this thing called Western Public Radio, and it was training classes, and I took 2 classes with Leo Lee. And Nancy, I was at there's a reason I'm telling you this story, but there was a point when I was really feeling low on myself, really feeling as though I'd never get a job in the business. And Leo Lee said to me, "You're going to make it, Jennifer." And I said, "Thank you." And he goes, "You know why? You've got gumption." And so now, in the word since, whenever I'm feeling low, I remember that Leo Lee one day years ago told me I had gumption. But the reason I'm telling you this is that the way we learned radio was on tape and using a razor blade and tape And one of the exercises we had was to take something somebody said and rearrange the words to make it say something else and sound natural, just for fun. Yeah.
But I think you're right that kids have no idea how easy they have it with their MacBooks.
Oh my gosh. And FaceTime.
Yeah.
And no idea.
Although I do sometimes say that if a telephone was invented now and where you could actually like call up and have a landline and talk to somebody in real time on the telephone, we would think it was a really great invention,
Oh, so, that's right.
Yeah,
if we hadn't had
a telephone previously.
I think you're right. If all the kids, instead of texting,
they'd be
would be calling.
Exactly. And it would seem so
Can
easy.
I call you? Yeah. I still have a landline, by the way.
Wow. I'm impressed.
Yeah. I've interviewed too many emergency management people to not have one.
Of course, did you ever have a party line?
I didn't. But that wasn't a thing in Atlanta, but people I know in Maine, that was a thing here, wasn't it?
Yeah. My family has a summer cottage on Damascotta Lake, and we had a party line like in the 70s. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes the neighbor would be listening in on your call and they'd be like, could you hang up? Because I'm expecting a call. But you had different rings for different residences.
You'd have to be careful what you said.
Yeah, exactly.
Good training for the rest of your life, right? Yeah, so that's the career in a sum.
Well, you have definitely developed a brand for Maine Calling. I mean, and you have a very loyal listening audience. And what this podcast is all about is developing an audience both in person and online. So what do you do to reward and keep your audience engaged?
Oh, gosh, Nancy, I'm probably the worst person for this because I do. I did go to the Nancy Marshall Social Media Boot Camp. And one thing I took away from it that I still do is when I do the Facebook post for Maine Calling, I like to try to lead with a question, if I can think of a good one. I don't really do as much as I ought to. I think our team is always talking about this. We have people who will do an Instagram post for us. Not me. Our producer, Cindy Hahn, will tweet. I'm lucky in that we really don't have to put a lot of effort into our brand because I'm already part of a brand that has incredible recognition. I'm already part of Maine Public Radio. So I really not in the position to give anybody any advice on branding.
But you put out great content. I mean, that's the key.
I guess that's what we do. We really think very hard about what we're doing for every program. And there are all sorts of criteria we're trying to meet with every program. One, we're always very aware that it's a statewide audience. So we're trying not to be too Portland-centric or Bangor-centric. We want to have a program that's interesting to everyone in the state. We want to have a mix of voices on the program as much as possible. We don't want to have a panel of all men, for example. We want to have diverse voices, not only racially, but also in terms of age. We have a big initiative this year to try to include more youth voices on Maine Calling. So we're thinking about these things. We're also thinking about people, frankly, who are good on the radio. Sometimes the person who's head of an organization is not the best guest on Maine Calling because that person is so used to their talking points and saying the same thing over and over again that they're not as good at just having a conversation. And so there are all sorts of things we're always thinking about. We're thinking about a mix of topics. We're thinking about what day of the week to do the topic that's a little bit lighter, what day of the week to do the show that's a little bit heavier. If we've had several medical related shows, maybe easing off on those for a while. There's so many things we're thinking about all the time. So it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. But again, I think the key to engaging an audience and keeping an audience coming back day after day is serving up great content that is educational, informative, and entertaining. And you're definitely doing that.
Oh, thank you. We're trying.
Yeah, it's not easy. So, do you have a how-to tip for PR, marketing, or social media?
I do. And we have done, Maine Calling has done a couple PR events aimed at PR people because we love them and they're very helpful. But the thing about Maine Calling is we're kind of the opposite of so much other media. For example, I remember when I worked at Channel 6, often the afternoon before we were looking at the file for the next day. And so it would really behoove a PR person to call us the day before something. That's not how Maine Calling works. Right now with COVID, we're doing things a lot differently than usual, but I'll talk about usual times because at some point, hopefully we'll get back to those. We're planning far out. We are planning, sometimes we have an entire month booked. And so if you're interested in a topic on Maine Calling, it's really great to get to us early. We have done programs. I'll give you an example. When AARP did its Scam Jam program, where they were helping people who are older not get scammed. It was a big event the first time they were staging it, and they wanted to know if it was possible if Maine Calling could be live from there. I think they contacted us in February, and the event was in November. So, and it hadn't even been released yet. You know, it was not a formal embargo, but Jane over at AARP approached us and said, we're thinking about doing this. Would you be interested? And Maine Calling can do that in a way that daily newspapers and TV stations can't. So that's the advice I would give someone is if you think something might be right for Maine Calling, to not wait until you have some formal permission or you're ready to put out a press release, but just let us know. The other thing is that the way we're kind of the opposite of every other organization that I've worked at or worked with is that we're not really doing a news story. We're not doing stories. We're having a conversation about something. So often every day I have many emails in my inbox with a story idea. Well, we don't do stories.
Right.
You know, let me think. What's today's program? Today's program is about how sociologists and anthropologists are going to view COVID and what they're going to think about. It could be a news story, but that's not a story. That's not a business opening or I'm working on a program for Monday about how COVID is affecting employment and the rules and norms. For example, employers now can take somebody's temperature when they come to work, which was not something that was allowed before. But all the different ways. And for Maine Calling, if a PR person's going to pitch us, I think they want to think, what would be the conversation about this topic? Is this something that people would want to call in and learn about or ask about or have an opinion about? Because it's the line I give, my little cliche line is, it's a conversation, not a presentation. It's not one way. It's not so much of reporting, so much of media is somebody telling the audience something. And that's not what Maine Calling is. Maine Calling is the audience having a conversation with people who are experts about something. And it's kind of, I think, hard sometimes for PR people to get their heads around because everything else they're doing is, how do I do this one-way communication? How do I phrase a message that will go out? Not how will I engage people in a conversation about something.
That's interesting. I hadn't ever really thought about that. That will be helpful to me too when I'm proposing stories.
Right.
Proposing conversations to you.
Yeah, and another little tip I'd give is to kind of look back and look at what Maine Calling's done recently. Often people will pitch us something we just did,
right?
or we just did something very similar, and we're not likely. Again, the COVID pandemic is an exception. Outside of the pandemic, we're not likely to return to a topic right after we've done it, even if it's a different angle on the same topic, because we have such a long list of topics we want to do that something has to be kind of big enough to bump something off the list we already have going.
Right. Well, I find with clients, sometimes new clients will call in and say, yeah, I want to go on TV and talk about, for example, how businesses have pivoted during COVID-19. And it's like sometimes they'll call several weeks after there's already been a flood of those stories.
Right.
And I'm like, you know what? That's going to be a really hard thing to do because it's not news. I mean, people, they see something on the news and they assume that if they're doing something similar that they're also going to be newsworthy, but
so they have to get their head around that.
Yeah,
the news means new.
Exactly.
Right. One thing I will say though, sometimes we'll get a pitch. Let's say a business, Nancy, has sent me an email saying that so and so at this company might be great to talk about businesses that are pivoting, and we've just done a main calling on that. I still might. And I still will tuck away that name. I'll say, Nancy has told me this person is good. And we often are putting together things that different people are telling us. Because maybe 6 months from now, we're going to do a show on businesses going back to normal. And I might remember that Nancy pitched me this person. So if we say no thank you right now, don't feel like you've wasted your time, because it might be in a pile of papers somewhere with this folder right here. And two, we do a lot of times, I don't want to put down any of my colleagues, but we actually mean it when we say we're going to hold on to that idea. And an example I'll give you is there are several different groups in Maine. This is from a couple of years ago. Several groups in Maine doing organizations doing something to bring people on different sides of the political spectrum together. There are several different initiatives. There's the coffee houses there, and all three had pitched us a program on civility, and none of the three knew about each other. But we did a main calling program on civility, and we had someone from each of the organizations who were doing their own different thing to talk about civility and bringing people together to talk.
That was brilliant.
Yeah, it doesn't usually fall into place that neatly, but sometimes it does.
Well, so that leads right into my next question, which is what makes a good call-in radio show?
Yeah, it's engagement, passion. It's people wanting to call in. People, probably somebody on AM talk radio would have a different answer than I have, because we're not looking for conflict. We're not looking for battles. We're looking for our executive producer Jonathan always says it has to be interesting, which sounds so bland, but it does. It has to be interesting. It has to be. Our biggest compliment is when somebody calls and says, I didn't think I was going to be interested in that topic, but then I listened for the whole hour.
Right.
So if our guest can make it interesting, and if it's something that resonates with the audience, our NPR audience.
And you said that, the person needs to be passionate. And I would imagine that there are times when the topic may in itself not seem that interesting. But if you have a passionate person who is passionate about doing whatever the thing is.
Yes, a good radio show is dependent on the good person who's your guest.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And more important than the topic is the guest.
Yeah. Well, I think that stands true for a lot of things. And I always say that if you're enthusiastic about what you're doing, if you bring energy and passion, as you said.
Yes. And you talk like a real person about it.
Right.
My biggest fear, Nancy, and this is, I guess, a tip for PR people, is when I ask my guests their first question, and the first thing they do is their head goes down to read what they've written before they come in.
And you're like, oh God.
Yeah,
what
really. When that happens, I'm texting my producers. Didn't you tell them? And I know that people come in and they're nervous. They're nervous, so they want to have something scripted.
Yeah.
But the audience can tell that it's scripted.
Yeah.
And no. If we invited you on main calling, you know enough about the topic to talk about it, not scripted. You don't need to write something. Just talk about it.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that people need to just learn. They need to have the confidence that they're going to be able to answer it without reading their script.
Right. They wouldn't have been invited if they didn't know it.
Right.
We're not going to have a wildlife biologist talk about shipbuilding.
Right.
We're just not going to do that.
Right, exactly. Well, this is really great. We're going to take a short break, Jennifer. We're going to continue the conversation. But first, I want to tell you about my new book that I published during COVID-19.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's called Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. And it is all about what we're talking about, which is the larger your audience, the larger your brand. And the way to engage an audience is by serving them with content that keeps them engaged. So I've been thinking about these kind of topics since I really got involved with content marketing over the past couple of years. And so I published this on Amazon.com, and there's a Kindle version. And actually, we're here at the Portland Pod today. I'm going to be recording an Audible version as well. I have to come in and read the 65 pages of the book.
Good for you, Nancy. Talk about trying new things.
Well, actually, I did a book 5 years ago, PR Works. And
did you do an Audible version of that as well?
Yep.
Oh, my gosh.
Although I must say there was some criticism that I sounded a bit wooden. So I'm going to make a real effort with this one to sound more like Nancy Marshall.
I don't know if I have any tips about how to do that, but I would agree that to try to sound like yourself is
That's right, yeah.
I guess just to sort of let go of some self-consciousness and go for it.
And when you're reading things, I mean, I know, like you said, I know these topics so well. I think about them all the time. So So that's what I'll be doing.
That was actually a tip I got from Bob Elliott, to just lose the self-consciousness. Just stop it. Just shed it. Like a second skin.
It's so funny that you bring up his name, because I was watching an interview with Dan Harris, who is a Colby College graduate where I went to school also. And he's the author of 10% Half Year. And he's very famous.
We've had him on Main Calling, yeah.
Yeah. And he talked about Bob Elliott and how much he learned from Bob Elliott. And for those listeners of PR Maven Nation who don't know Bob Elliott, he was a great broadcaster and storyteller on WCSH in the 80s, 90s.
Well, I started in 94, and he had been there for a couple of years already, I think. He had been an NBC News correspondent. He grew up in South Portland, and I believe his father, I don't want to say too much, but I think his father was getting much older, and Bob wanted to spend time with him. And was kind of tired of the network gig. It was really grueling, and came back to Channel 6 and had this weekly thing called Bob's Basement, which was always funny. He did regular standard reporting as well, but Bob's Basement, I mean, everybody in Maine looked forward to Bob's Basement. It was a thing. And I cannot look at a Christmas decoration that's still up in April without thinking of Bob's Basement, because he and Steve Phillips, the videographer, would go out every April and do the High Five Six Alive action team, and they would have a megaphone and a pickup truck, and they would go to houses where people and a ladder and a great big hook, and they go to houses where people still have their Christmas decorations up or holiday decorations up, and bark into the megaphone for them to come out and offer to help them take down their decorations. And it was an annual thing, and it was always so funny and so fun, but done with such a silly spirit that they were a little embarrassed, but they didn't feel insulted.
I love that. I have a thing about Christmas decorations. Even I feel like January 1st, they should come down. I'm so tired of seeing them.
Oh, that's funny.
And I feel like as part of your New Year's resolutions, you need to get all that stuff. Put it away.
That's funny. I'm not that. I'll go into January. I think it kind of depends how cold and dark things are,
Yeah.
And so if it's really cold and dark, I'll leave the lights up for a while.
Yeah.
but not April.
No. There is rumor that there's a law, like a blue law, that you have to take them down by Easter, but I'm not sure if that's true or not.
That's funny.
We'll have to Google
that's Bob
that.
Elliott. I learned a lot from Bob Elliott, but his tip to me, I'll pass on to everybody else. The sooner you can just shed that self-consciousness, and just when you feel it creeping in, just say, go away.
Yeah.
The better.
Right. I love that. That's great. I hope there's some of Bob Elliott's videos still.
Oh, yeah. I think they have been playing some of them. I mean, I don't watch a lot of TV right now, but I think they have been playing some of them.
Yeah.
On Channel 6.
Great. Okay. Well, we're going to take a quick break now. We're going to hear about the online course that I launched recently about mastering your messages with message mapping. We'll be right back.
Do you want to grow your client or customer base? Perhaps increase brand awareness? Maybe tell your unique story more effectively? Of course you do. But you may be worried that you don't have enough expertise to make that happen. Well, no worries, PR Maven Nation. Let the PR Maven herself, Nancy Marshall, show you how easy it is to get your message across effectively using a powerful yet simple tool, a message map. Nancy's training is often called informative and constructive, well-designed and impactful, with a perfect blend of theory and real-life experience. You will leverage Nancy's expertise to create your own message map when you register for this comprehensive online video training course, which is broken down into 4 easy-to-understand modules. Normally, this course is priced at $147, but for listeners of the PR Maven podcast, that's you, PR Maven Nation, it's only $29 when you enter the code word podcast during enrollment. It even includes a workbook and bonus content to guide you through the process. So go to prmaven.com and click on the Message Map Mastery course to enroll today. Remember, enter the word podcast during enrollment for a special discounted price of $29.
Welcome back. And today we're talking with Jennifer Rook, Maine Calling host for Maine Public Radio. And I want to dive right back in with some more questions for you, Jennifer. The Maine Public brand and the audience are exceptionally strong. And speaking of Maine Public, how is public media different than commercial media?
That's a great question. It took me a while, even after I started working there, to get my head around it. And the first thing that I learned, all my life I've watched PBS and listened to NPR. The first thing I learned was what PBS stands for. Do you know what PBS stands for?
Public Broadcasting Service.
Right. But I thought it meant Public Broadcasting System.
Yeah.
You know, because you worked there.
Right, yeah.
And the whole idea of service, that this is a service, is profoundly different. It's not that when I worked in commercial television, the individual reporters and producers weren't trying to serve their audience. They were. I worked with a lot of amazing people who are always trying to do their best and believed in journalism. But it's like everything's the way it's thought about is completely different. And here's an example. For television and radio, and I learned this. I had an opportunity to go to the PBS Producers Academy about 13 years ago, and had someone explain this to me, and it makes so much sense. In television and radio, commercial, the whole idea is to get as many people watching or listening at the same time, so you can sell advertising. You know, the more eyeballs on the TV screen on the Super Bowl, the more expensive the advertising is, and that's just the model, the business model. In public media, the whole idea is to have an idea for a program, to raise the money to make that program, and then to get it out to as many people as possible. So I did a documentary film with Randy Liberty, who was then Kennebec County Sheriff and is now Department of Corrections, about post-traumatic stress. We raised enough money to make the film. We made the film. And then we kept pushing it out to other PBS stations. Randy took it to the National Sheriff's Conference. It's a whole different thing. It's let's figure out what's important to the audience. Let's figure out a way to make it, and let's get it out to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Am I explaining well how it's different?
It's a paradigm shift.
It's a paradigm shift,
right.
Yeah. And it's not... I don't in any way want to denigrate my friends in the other world, because they're all doing good work. But the emphasis on ratings is so much stronger. And things are eliminated so much more quickly if they aren't getting the ratings. than in the public media world.
Right. The public media world is maybe more mission oriented.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a much better way of putting it than the long way I just put it.
Yeah. And I think parents, for example, can depend on the standards and
Right.
the values of what their children will watch
Right.
on public.
Right. When they're creating children's programming and putting it on in the 1 in the afternoon, they're not saying, could we be putting something else on that would have more viewers? Because of course we could be.
Right.
We could be putting something on that would have more viewers than a children's television show. Not that ratings don't matter at all. If one children's television show has no viewers,
Right.
the kids aren't even watching, then something needs to change. But the whole idea of filling your daytime schedule with children's programming is not something that would be easy to monetize
Right.
in the commercial world.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think that PBS really exemplifies the idea of a trusted brand.
Yeah.
I mean, people trust that PBS is going to deliver quality.
Right. And because they have. It's
Proven.
proven.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, no, it's a very good example of what I try to talk about in the podcast, and also delivering both online and in person, because I know that when we can get together, that PBS does have in-person events as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I enjoy attending those.
I hope that we can get back to them soon.
Yeah, right. I hope so too. Being an extremely extroverted person, this
has been hard on you, Nancy.
This quarantine stuff. I wasn't born for this. There are certain people like authors who, they don't really see a big difference. They're used to being,
Right.
by themselves and holed up.
I read, though, even for introverts, it's hard because introverts don't seek out human connection, but they still need it. And so those happenstance things that used to happen for them aren't happening anymore. They had to go into the office and somebody came up and asked them how their day was. And now there isn't that
That's interesting.
going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the world is going to be the same, but I just hope that we can at least have some more human contact.
More hugs.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Jennifer, most successful people like you have a network of fans and followers, either online or in person. How have you built your network, and has it happened as a conscious goal, or has it just happened on its own?
It's happened on its own. And thank you for saying that. I don't know. It's being a reporter in the same state for more than 25 years and just meeting a lot of people, I think.
Right. So you have a large network.
Yes, it's definitely not been conscious. I'm not very active on social media. I do keep on my desk at work, which I haven't seen in weeks, my Rolodex, even though I don't use it anymore. It's so big and so full that it makes me happy just to have it sitting on my desk.
It's funny you mentioned that. I still have mine too, because it's a symbol of another era.
Yes, yes.
And Charlene Williams, who is now the president of my agency and has been with me for 26 years, I think. When I first hired her, it was part-time, and her project was to make a database out of my Rolodex. And,
oh my gosh.
And so if I had just incomplete information about people, if I just had their phone number, she would actually call them and get their mailing address.
Oh, my goodness. I know we don't get mail anymore, do we?
I love mail. I actually have pen pals.
Oh, good for you.
I love
But
writing.
I remember when I worked at Channel 6, the mailboxes were the first thing. You got off the elevator, you opened the door, and there was the mailbox. And every day, the first thing you did was check your mail. There might be a press release. There might be a letter from an audience member with a news tip. And I'll go weeks without checking my mailbox at my job now. And often there's nothing really in there.
I know. It's sad.
If I'm lucky, maybe a thank you note or something,
right, yeah,
I
know. I still think there's a place for the mail. So I hope it doesn't.
Me too.
It doesn't go away. Is there a resource such as a book, a website, or an app that you have found helpful in your career, and why is that?
you're going to laugh at me. We're talking about how old-fashioned we are. The book that I use the most is my dictionary. I have my college dictionary, the paperback version, right in front of my computer. And I just flip it open all the time. All the writing. Does that, is that the right word for this place in this sentence? Flip open my dictionary all the time. In fact, I miss my dictionary because I'm working from home right now, and I do have a dictionary at home, but it's a big unabridged wedding gift dictionary, not my little paperback.
That's amazing that your paperback has withstood.
It's funny.
Years.
I was thinking I might need to replace it because it's old enough now that in language changes, evolves, that perhaps I need a more contemporary dictionary.
Probably, yeah.
And you can look words up online, of course, but
Right.
there's something about being in the middle of a sentence, the paragraph's on your screen, and just picking up the dictionary that's in front of you and flipping to that word.
Well, perhaps you'll have to put that with your Rolodex.
Get a little glass case for the two of them.
Yeah, exactly. It'll go in the Jennifer Rook's museum someday. Is there anything else you'd like to share with members of PR Maven Nation today?
Oh, gosh, Nancy, I don't know. You've been a good interviewer. I guess the big thing is if you want to pitch main calling, the best way to contact us is email.
Okay.
It's just a very simple tip.
And should they email you or Jonathan?
They could either, Jonathan Smith is our executive producer. Cindy Hahn is our other producer. We have an inbox, talk@mainpublic.org. So if you're not sure, you can send it right. The three of us monitor that. Cindy is C. Hahn, which is HAN at mainpublic.org. Jonathan is JP Smith at mainpublic.org. Pretty much everybody at Main Public is first initial last name at mainpublic.org, but we have a Julie Smith and a Jonathan Smith, so he's JP Smith at mainpublic.org.
And what is yours then? Is it J. Rooks?
Yep.
All right.
And we really do a lot by email. I know every organization sort of has its own culture and its own way of doing things, but especially now when we're not at our desk. But I do not like voicemail. I don't know why. I don't like voicemails. Please don't leave me a voicemail.
Oh, that's a good tip too.
I don't know why. I just don't like voicemail. Usually my voicemail box is full and that's just fine.
Right.
I probably shouldn't be saying that. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that.
And how about Twitter? Are you on Twitter?
No.
No.
I signed up when I did Nancy Marshall's PR boot camp. So I have an account out there in the ether somewhere, but I have never once tweeted in my life. It makes me uncomfortable.
That's interesting.
I really take being an objective journalist seriously, and I don't want to. I know many journalists tweet. I'm not interested, and maybe someday somebody will make me, but I'm okay without it.
Well, you probably have more peace of mind because it is sort of distracting, I think, sometimes.
Well, and there's so many distractions, aren't there?
Yes, there are. But again, I have found this time lately without a lot of commitments to be really a peaceful time. It has been good for my mental health, actually.
Right. And, there's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's Instagram. I mean, who knows? When we're doing a radio show, when we're making a web page for our radio show, and I mean, at some point, I'm still old-fashioned enough that the content is the thing.
Yeah, well, no, and the content is the thing.
Yeah, and I guess I'm lucky in that other people where I work can do the other stuff.
Right, yeah.
So maybe if I were on my own, I would feel more compelled to learn all this.
Well, that's part of the reason why I record my podcast at the Portland Pod, because someone years ago said to me that Frank Sinatra doesn't move the piano. He just shows up to sing.
I like that.
So that's why I don't try to deal with
I do most days, not all, but most days I am the person who does the main calling Facebook post. But part of the reason I do that, one, is our producers just have so much on their plate, but two, I'm spending my morning prepping for the show anyway, so finding a good article is sort of part of the prep. I like to find a good article related to the topic and post it on Facebook. And so it's kind of part of the prep for the show to be looking at what's been written about whatever topic we have that day.
Yeah, that's interesting too.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so great.
Thank
I
you,
feel like
Nancy.
we probably could go on and on, so maybe we'll have to have you come back.
All right. Hopefully that wouldn't be too much.
Never too much.
Nancy, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
I really enjoyed this time. Thank you, Jennifer. And I hope you have a great day, PR Maven Nation. That's it for this week's episode. I'd like to thank you for listening, and if you feel that you've gotten value out of today's conversation, consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever app you're using to tune in. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should do so. I release a new episode each week, and subscribing will make sure you get an alert when there's a new episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation by going to prmaven.com/nation and clicking join. It's free, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you have an Alexa-enabled device, be sure to add the PR Maven Marketing Minute to your daily flash briefing menu. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.